If you drove through Detroit in the 1950s, you'd think you'd found America's crown jewel. Shining factories, good jobs, and streets filled with Cadillacs fresh off the assembly line. But take that same drive today, and you'll see a different city. Boarded up homes, empty factories, and neighborhoods that once built cars, now building drug empires. Detroit didn't just collapse, it transformed. From Motor City to Murder City. This is the story of how one of America's proudest cities became a battleground for gangs, mobsters, and survival itself. Before we begin, hit subscribe, because to understand cities like Detroit, you have to understand the underworld that shaped them. Detroit was once the heartbeat of America. Henry Ford built an empire here, and by the 1940s, it was the richest city per capita in the entire nation. People came from everywhere, the Deep South, Italy, Poland, chasing the dream of steady pay and a house with a yard. But with prosperity came power struggles. And where there's money, there's always someone ready to take it the easy way. During Prohibition, Detroit became one of the main smuggling routes for illegal liquor, straight from Canada, just across the Detroit River. Rum runners and mog bosses made millions overnight. You could stand on the riverbank and see boats sneaking across the fog with barrels of whiskey guarded by men holding Tommy guns. The city's mafia, known as the Partnership, was already taking shape, a coalition of Sicilian and Jewish gangsters who ran gambling, protection rackets, and bootlegging. Names like Joe Zerilli, William Black Bill Tocco, and Sam Bernstein became whispered legends. By the time Prohibition ended, Detroit had already learned one hard truth. Crime, like industry, can be organized. The Zerilli family became Detroit's version of the Cosa Nostra. They were smart, quieter than Chicago's outfit, less flashy than the New York families. They built their power through unions, nightclubs, and the flow of heroin coming in from Montreal and New York. But they weren't the only ones. Detroit was big enough for multiple players. The Purple Gang, made up mostly of young Jewish toughs from Hastings Street, controlled the East Side through raw fear and brutality. They ran the city's liquor trade and even dealt directly with Al Capone during the Chicago Wars. When the Purple Gang's members began turning on each other, the Mafia stepped in to fill the vacuum. But their shadow never left Detroit. Their violence helped set the tone for generations to come. By the late 1960s, the factory lights started dimming. Automation, outsourcing, and racial tension ripped Detroit apart. White flight drained the tax base, and unemployment in the black community hit record highs. When the 1967 riots erupted, whole neighborhoods burned. What rose from the ashes wasn't just poverty, it was opportunity for the underground. Criminal organizations thrived in the chaos. The heroin market exploded, and local kingpins began to replace the old-school mafia. Enter the Young Boys Incorporated, or YBI. They weren't just street dealers, they were innovators. A group of young black men in the late 1970s who ran heroin like a corporation. They had payrolls, uniforms, and even marketing strategies. They hired kids to act as lookouts and used clean-cut teenagers to avoid suspicion. At their peak, YBI was bringing in millions every month. Their leader, Butch Jones, became a local legend, respected, feared, and envied all at once. But as fast as they rose, they fell. The FBI cracked down hard, and when the indictments came, they were massive. By the mid-'80s, most of YBI's leaders were locked up. But they left behind a blueprint for the next generation, one that mixed business with blood. Then came crack cocaine, and with it, Detroit's darkest decade. Every block had a dealer, every night had a shooting. Neighborhoods turned into war zones, where young men fought over corners that might earn them a few $100s a day. Gangs like the Best Friends, the Earl Fly Gang, and Pony Down turned the streets into battlegrounds. Detroit's murder rates skyrocketed. By the early 1990s, the city had one of the highest homicide rates in the nation. And through it all, whispers of old mafia connections never disappeared. The Partnership still had its hands in gambling, construction, and union politics, operating from the suburbs while the city they once ruled decayed. FBI reports in the late 1910s confirmed that the Zerilli Tocco family, descendants of the original Detroit mob, were still active, though smaller and more discreet than ever. They understood what the streets didn't. Survival isn't about flash, it's about patience. Their story mirrors Detroit's itself, beaten down, written off, but never quite dead. Today, when you walk through downtown Detroit, you can feel something shifting. Cafes, art studios, and tech startups are slowly replacing the burned-out buildings. Former gang members are mentoring youth, telling them what prison really feels like, not what the songs make it sound like. And across the neighborhoods, from Dexter Linwood to Mack Avenue, new community projects are bringing people together again. It's not perfect, it's not easy, but it's real. Detroit is learning that resilience is its own kind of revenge. You can take away the factories, the fame, the money, but you can't kill spirit. When people talk about Detroit, they talk about failure. But the truth is, this city has done what few others could: survive its own collapse. For every name in a headline, there's 1,000 stories untold. Stories of mothers keeping the lights on, of fathers working double shifts, of kids rapping about pain instead of acting it out. Detroit's streets may have been ruled by the underworld once, but its future is being rebuilt by the same people who refuse to leave. And maybe that's what makes Detroit's story so powerful. Not the crime, not the money, but the fight to still believe in something better. Because in the Motor City, the engine never really stopped. It just needed a reason to start again. If you want to understand America's underworld, its rise, fall, and redemption, subscribe for more stories like this one. From Detroit to Chicago, from the Bronx to LA, we'll keep uncovering the truth behind the myths, the history they don't teach you, but you deserve to know.